Well, good morning, everyone. I have to admit, I've never seen someone put all my titles on the board before, so that's pretty interesting. But yes, definitely this panel today will be a very hot topic, as we've seen in the recent weeks on nuclear. And so hopefully this will be a really, really exciting topic, especially since we are the last panel between you all and lunch. So let's make this a very exciting and nuclear topic, right? So a quick introduction about myself. As you've seen from the board, I'm of a company in Singapore called HYMNE Consultancy Services. One of the areas that we have been looking at is a lot of green energy integration, and so recently we started talking about adding nuclear to the services. So that's a bit about my background. But enough about me. Let's pass the time over to the panelists. So maybe Alistair and Andrew, you guys can do a quick introduction about yourself.
So I'm Alistair Morrison from Oxford Sigma. We're a UK-based company that's looking at extreme environments and how to put the right materials in the right places. So we work primarily in the nuclear space, but also in other places where materials deal with difficult things. That gives us a very agnostic perspective on how to deal with the different needs for a future energy transition.
And my name is Andrew. So I'm from A-STAR, which is the National R&D Labs. So over there in A-STAR, I head a team looking into technologies developed for future energy, because as we know, when we are moving into future energies, a lot of those comes with challenges and technology, and this is where A-STAR will then comes in. And along the way, while we develop technology, it is also our mandate to also level up the economic ecosystems as well, so that we bring them together into the supply chain. Thanks.
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you, Andrew. So we can see our panel covers both private sector and even government research institutes. So it's actually quite an interesting range of people that we'll be talking about nuclear today. And of course, many of us in this room are aware the demand for AI is definitely growing, and the demand for data centers managing these AIs are growing as well. And it's actually creating a bit of an energy crisis because the demand of data centers is actually outstripping energy supply. In fact, I think there was a report earlier this year in April by the International Energy Agency that stated by 2030, data center energy consumption is going to be approximately 945 terawatt hours, which is basically just slightly over the annual energy consumption of Japan. That's huge. And it's probably no surprise if it's an underestimate given how much exponential growth there is in AI demand. So when I ask about this topic to many people, the question always comes back to, can nuclear power the AI growth, which is how this entire topic has begun. So I would like to ask Alistair and maybe even Andrew, can you, as an introduction to the entire audience here, can we just do a very quick intro on your views of the difference between fission and fusion so we can set the grounds?
So I'll jump in first there. So fission is taking a large atom and breaking it into part. It's something we're quite good at internationally. There's a great deal of expertise in making that work and actually getting power out of systems. Fusion is the more exciting end, where we think we have lower hazards, lower risks, lower waste, but we take small atoms and join them together. That's the subject of a lot of ongoing work at the moment with a great deal of challenges. Total investment in the private industry is around $10 billion in the last 10 years, but I think there's a realizable market of $30 trillion for whoever can get it to work right.
Yeah. And to add on to that, difference between fission and fusions, while Alistair mentioned about how fusions is the splitting of atoms, we now know fusions as the fused of the atoms. And you might be wondering, given that we have already decades of experience dealing with fusions, why do we still want to look at fusions? Well, there is a few benefits of those. One of those is definitely a shorter lifetime for the nuclear waste. And of course, the other thing is the density of the energy produced by fusion. So as compared to fusions, it is 4 times denser than that. So imagine in the capacity needs from the energy needs for Singapore in 2023, the amount of energy that you need can just be solved by a ton of fusions. That means you can imagine a ton is just the weight of your salon car. So that is also the reasons why fusions is deemed as the dark horse when it comes to energy. But of course, with that, right, there comes a lot of challenges as well, because when it comes to neutrons that is generated from fusions, it is 7 times higher than that of fissions. So you can imagine whatever current technology or materials that you use to hold fissions together will not be able to withstand that of fusions, and therefore there is a lot of R&D involved as well. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent points actually raised. And I forgot to mention this at the beginning. We are mindful that this topic is very exciting and very hot as well. So we are actually going to have an opportunity for the audience to ask questions at around the 20-minute mark, and at the end of the panel, for some Q&A as well. So please do not hesitate to ask the questions. This is a good time to clarify if you have any doubts or clarifications you want to ask about the topic. But yes, to both of you, thanks for bringing up those points. And it is the field is definitely exciting, and a lot of the points raised relates to challenges on the material side. I mean, Oxford Sigma, you mentioned, Alistair, that you guys are working on materials in the hazard environment. And also, Andrew talked about how in the fusion environment, the kind of neutron energies that you're dealing with is creating waste that requires certain kinds of materials to manage. So definitely, it appears actually from that conversation that materials seems to be one of the greatest challenges in this new nuclear space, fusion as well. So perhaps you can add in some points. So from that perspective, maybe Alistair, I'd like to ask you, why did Oxford Sigma take a look at materials directly? Is it because it's such a large challenge, or was there other reasons you look at it?
I'm going to have to jump in there as a kind of the scientist in me. There are no other industries really where you need a new material to make things happen. Fusion is unique in that it's not incremental improvements we need to make, but step changes. That's kind of akin to the things that have been happening in AI, and something that AI probably will be able to help with in the future, is helping us to solve some of those problems that allow us to get to the materials that we need to make this a sort of global industry and something that everybody can interact with. But at the moment, for us as a company, it's about developing the technologies that will help us to get there, to get to the first stages of power stations, which is still some way off. And fission has that advantage of it's going to be a power source for AI in a much shorter time frame. So looking from regulation being set up to power plants being delivered with power on the grid is probably around 10 years for fission. But in fusion, you're still looking at sort of, best conservative estimates at the moment being sort of 5 to 10 years for the first demonstrators. Maybe slightly less if you're very optimistic, but that's still talking about power stations being 15 to 20 years away.
Thanks for that. Well, those are really long timelines. You've basically given us a range between 5 years at the most optimistic to realistically 15 to 20. And so actually, I would like to direct this next question to Andrew then. So one of the points that was raised in the introduction for this topic is about the main point is nuclear will power the AI revolution. But at the same time, to accelerate some of the timelines that Alistair mentioned, there are points about how AI can enhance the discovery of these new materials to manage fusion, fission, all the nuclear alike. So maybe, Andrew, to direct the question to your side, especially coming from A-Star's perspective, can you comment on this symbiotic relationship between AI developing nuclear and then nuclear powering this AI boom?
Yeah, sure. So in fact, AI has been trendy for the past few years. And in fact, in A-Star, while we develop technology or even manufacturing, we are also incorporating AI into those. So let me talk from the smaller scale of looking at materials. So the conventional way of looking at materials is to really go through it, the brute force method. You try on one sample, you work on it, you get some results, and if it doesn't work, you go back to your ground zero again, and then you start working on those. So with the use of AI, we are able to also incorporate high throughputs and then generate a lot of data, connect those dots, and in a very short time developed the optimal materials for this. So how short am I referring to? We actually do have a program that accelerates the developments of materials by 10 times faster. Meaning to say, whatever that you develop that require you to use 10 years to do that, we are targeting to achieve it in about a year's time. So those are just materials level. If you were to move up to a process level of how things run in the labs, this is where in A-Star we are also introducing and developing the labs of the future, where it is an AI-driven lab that then allows you to go through all those, not just in silo, but also get the stations to work together with each other. And how does that translate to the manufacturing sectors? We have a sectoral centers of manufacturing, which we call AI for manufacturing. This is where we want to accelerate the adoptions of whatever solutions that I mentioned just now into the industry, with the focus of number one, tap adoption, and number two, the leveling up of the workforce as well. So all in all, right, with all that in place, the last thing that probably fits into will be the case of a virtual labs, and this is where digital twins will then comes in very handy. So as you can see, right, the team here is on AI, and AI is something that we have embraced quite a lot, even from the angle of the research.
And definitely exciting to hear about all this, how AI can accelerate this development, right? And so thanks also for the shout out on digital twin, my area. That's pretty exciting to hear. So, I mean, it sounds all well and good, but the nuclear industry is no stranger, right, to suddenly seeing delays over and over again. It's not about being negative, it's about being realistic. So we talk a lot about all this AI helping with the new materials development, looking at new materials to enable this fusion growth and even fission growth. But from now we move to let's talk about some of the challenges, because it does sound all good. So we start with Alistair. From your perspective, what are besides the material development challenges, what are the actual hurdles that we will see as new in terms of trying to deploy nuclear to power this AI boom to also help itself?
So one of the biggest challenges is probably going to be skills, and the number of people we have that are able to understand the problems enough to say whether what is being done right and being done safely. Getting to this kind of skills you need is a long and slow process. It's going to start with getting sort of a general understanding of the two different types of nuclear that you might need to produce power, which is sort of getting general population to a point where they're sort of interested in it enough to go and start to study it. Typically, it's very integrated engineering problems, very integrated with the physics and the maths, but also the engineering and the manufacturing. So it requires people with quite a holistic perspective on it. Couple that with making sort of complex decision-making processes means that it takes time to train those people up to be able to actually, firstly, build, design, and then operate these power plants. So there's a big challenge there in terms of doing that and getting those stages built. It needs a very educated workforce to get there for the moment. And I'm sure that's something that AI will be able to improve in terms of identifying key areas to improve in, but it will still require people.
And maybe Andrew, same question to you as well. And maybe because from an A-Star perspective, where do you see the challenges also in deploying nuclear in the future? And maybe let's pull a bit from Singapore's context and go ASEAN context. What is your perspective on this matter?
Well, I think let's be frank. Even when it comes to the government, they are also saying they are considering, they have yet to fix on nuclear as an energy source. So therefore, even within A-Star, while we are developing technology to get ourselves ready for fusions, we are also making sure that the technology that we developed are also applicable for many other near-term, immediate industry as well. Things like, for example, the aerospace industry, the oil and gas industry. So all those are industry that also require the materials or the technology to withstand harsh environment. So therefore, in the area that we are pursuing, if you were to look at the programs that I'm leading, while I talk about future energy, it actually comprises of not just nuclear, but also things like hydrogen, geothermal as well, which in the Singapore energy mix are also future energy that Singapore is considering. And therefore, with those in mind and with those of a nearer term, this is how we ensure that the technology that we develop will not only be relevant in the long term, but it will also pay dividends when it comes to the near-term adjacency industry as well.
Thanks for that perspective. And I think you've raised a very important point that I think, especially for a country like Singapore, right, who's talking about nuclear right now and at the early stages, Alistair brought up the fact about getting a nuclear workforce ready and getting the kind of right talent. And I think one of the important points that a few folks have raised in other discussions as well is ensuring that we have the right ecosystem to develop this workforce and also finding the opportunities. So I think this is a very nice segue into the topic actually I think will be very relevant. It's about building this ecosystem and finding the opportunities. Singapore, we have A-Star doing some research, we have the government doing a lot of those background studies. But from a more private sector perspective, maybe Alistair, this can be to you. From your perspective, how would you advise private sector in Singapore to consider building this ecosystem literally from the ground up? What's your perspective on that?
So it's got to start with taking some risks and trying to identify things that maybe the market isn't that strong for today, but will be in the future years. It's a slow process to build up some of these areas, but it will get quicker as the demand increases. So getting your feet on the ground today is probably more important than waiting for the market to be there entirely and just trying to work out the ways to get that funding going. And I think separately it's important to recognize the other aspects of nuclear that will be very important in a sort of wider energy mix for somewhere like Singapore. So you may not need the full power of a power station running all the time, but it will come with power that can be produced ideally at a continuous level for longer periods of time. So you might have then excess electricity that you can use for other purposes or excess industrial heat that you can use for other purposes. So that could be for the cogeneration of hydrogen, but that could also be for water desalination. So when AI data centers aren't running in the night because people aren't asking as many questions, you've got a time frame there where you can actually start to produce clean water to go and use for the daytime. And I think getting people to think about some of those opportunities and how they tie together, what the integration looks like, how do you start making sort of small prototype systems, the digital twins that Matthew does, to start thinking about what that does look like.
Indeed, excellent. And actually, you brought up a very interesting point about finding all this, about taking the risks and in order to develop these capabilities. And I think actually it's apt that we have Andrew from A-Star talking about it, because A-Star's mandate is to help the ecosystem build a lot of these new capabilities. So Andrew, then my question is, from your perspective, how can A-Star help drive the development of these ecosystems with private sector players?
Okay, so again, I want to bring it to the fact that, in that search for companies who are keen to also join fusions and be part of the supply chain, they will also want to find technology that allow them to de-risk. De-risk in the sense that while they are keen to be part of the fusion supply chain or the nuclear supply chain, they were also thinking that this thing wasn't even in Singapore yet, or wasn't even in Southeast Asia yet. So in that case, is there other business opportunities that they can tap on with those technology that we have developed? And therefore, in our search and in our talks to them, it turns out that there are quite a few. And of course, let me then maybe mention one or two of those that we have already gained some tractions. So for example, when it comes to the structural steel of a nuclear reactor, as much as possible, we will want to take away a component called nickel. So nickel is something that will be activated, meaning to say it will turn radioactive if it interacts with neutrons. So in this case, right, while we are trying to find solutions to minimize that, we have developed a nickel-free stainless steel. So the performance of the nickel-free stainless steel is equivalent to that of the conventional stainless steel 316. And of course, from the local company or from the company perspective, an alternative to stainless steel 316 without the need for nickel, which if, in case you don't know, is actually very expensive, will then bring down the cost, the manufacturing cost of the steel itself. And this is what has been getting a few companies interested to discuss further. This is one way where the companies get interested, license those tech, and benefits the existing sectors or product lines of theirs while getting themselves ready when nuclear supply chain comes in. The other examples is we have also developed high temperature polymer. And for those who are in the know, polymer typically operates at about up to 300 degrees Celsius of operating temperature. Anything above that, right, the polymer will degrade. So what we have developed is a polymer class that allows you to operate up to 600 degrees Celsius. And as you can imagine, right, this then open up a lot of the business opportunity for those who are in this industry to tap on those technology and then open up more businesses, again, while waiting for the fusions industry to come.
Can I add to that as well? I think it's pertinent to say it's not just in the materials and the manufacturing space, but the innovations that are needed to make something like fusion happen, such a big challenge. They will cover things we have no idea where the uses might be in the future. So one of the interesting cases at the moment is the response times on control systems for fusion plasmas, so that's the bit where the reaction takes place. You're looking at nanosecond control times that are then feeding back into managing currents in magnets and things like that. Getting that kind of speed of sort of computational sort of management of the systems is incredibly complicated, but will no doubt have applications in other areas that need such high response times as well.
I echo what Alexa is saying about that control side of things. Because when it comes to a plasma that is swirling around, creating that neutrons, it is very important for you to be able to diagnose those in real time, and then after that, remedy or control that if this thing goes haywire. So in that case, right, the ability to real-time diagnose will then rely a lot in AI currently, and in future, I would say even more. So all those will be the areas where AI can then come in as well.
Thank you both, actually. So the biggest takeaway is that when you talk about looking for innovation in the nuclear sector, it is not just for nuclear. There are other opportunities that come faster. They've also just as big as impact. I mean, the last topic was about impact investing. There's also impact on other industries if you try to innovate in the nuclear space. So I would like to actually take this opportunity now to open the floor, open questions to the floor for clarifications on this topic. I'm certain many of you would have a lot of questions, right? So please feel free to ask the questions that you want to have clarified. Anyone? Really, none? Or is it because everyone just wants a lunch? Okay, but okay, there's a question right there. Yes, at the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. It's really insightful. We learned a lot about fission and fusion. Just a quick question from my side. We know that fission works and SMRs are already there. I'm just wondering what is preventing a small nation country from adopting this technology as of now, and how far are we from seeing it live in action?
That's a very relevant question. And Alistair just recommended Andrew to answer the question. So Andrew.
Okay, so I will probably comment a little bit on that. So in Singapore, clearly we haven't decided on that yet, so that is for sure. But that doesn't stop us from being actively looking at that, because if you do notice, countries around us, be it Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, they all has already expressed interest to look into nuclear as a source. So therefore, in Singapore, we already established SNERSI, which is a institute that is looking into the safety aspects of things, given that if things were to happen in our neighboring country, even if we don't have it in Singapore, what are we going to respond to this, and how much reaction times do we have of all sorts of simulations, reliability study, and so on. So from the R&D side of things, again, while we are trying to prepare for those and not knowing whether that will come, it doesn't prevent us from also getting our companies ready to be part of the supply chain. I will probably want to cite an example of the aerospace industry as well. So for example, in the aerospace industry, we don't build plane in Singapore. However, it doesn't stop us from having the engines companies over here and then developing and uplifting a lot of local companies, the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 companies in Singapore, and then lift up the whole economic scene in Singapore. So likewise, as far as I can see, this is what is happening here. And of course, it is also in the news that Singapore is now evaluating, and we have also gotten a consultants to look into the deployment of all those. In the agency and in the ministry, there is also specific department that is looking into nuclear now. So it is no longer just one of those, it is a department that is looking closely into those. But at the end of the day, I must say that for Singapore, one thing that we need to be clear is we also need to take notes of the public's perceptions as well. So this is something that is clearly beyond the financial capital, that is clearly beyond the technologies that we develop. And for that point of view, right, I do also know that because I have kids who is now studying in secondary school, now they already have their revisions in syllabus. They are already a lot more in-depth understanding of what nuclear is all about, and also what is the difference between fissions and fusions. So I think this is a good start, because while we might not be working on that, or we might not deploy that in Singapore, having awareness is the most important thing, so that when the times is ready and when the technology is ready, when Singapore intend to do that, the people are also supportive of those. So I hope that answers your questions.
Just to build on top of that, I think it's something that you can all take away from here today is to go and have a read of some of the information on the Energy Market Authority's website on what nuclear is and how it could be used. And I would advise you all to get your children looking at nuclear, because it will be the future energy source for baseload power worldwide. I think there's no way around that from my perspective. Whether that's fission or fusion or other, it's worth going out and finding out about it today rather than in 5 or 10 years' time.
Thanks for that. I hope it answers the question. Yep. Is there any other questions from the audience? We have time. Anyone? Oh, yep, the lady in blue.
Thank you. Hi, gentlemen. I have 2 questions. So the first question would be, with the interest of investing in nuclear energy, would the nuclear energy be really a better alternative in terms of green energy? And how do we actually have a more disciplined way to, put it this way, deal with the nuclear waste? That's one. Second question would be, with the ongoing trade wars and tariffs, how do we ensure that the supply chain of our raw materials to supply nuclear energy to be less disruptive in today's time? Thank you.
Thanks for those questions. Just a quick plug on the nuclear waste thing. I'm actually giving a lecture on nuclear waste management next week. If you're interested, please come and find me if you want to know more. Anyway, but those are very pertinent questions, I would say. Before I pass the time over to my panelists to answer, I would just say that point has come up in almost every conversation. So I think I would like to pass, Andrew looks really ready, so I'd like to pass the point to Andrew. Which question would you like to answer? Maybe on the waste management? Would you like to give a shot?
Supply chain.
Okay, he wants a supply chain one, so he can answer that.
Reasons being, while we try and develop things for the companies, right, they were also thinking about the whole supply chain rather than just the part that they are playing. Where can they get their suppliers from? At which locations, and where are the markets that they can then sell that to, and so on. So on the part of the supply chain, as you know, right, when it comes to areas like nuclear, there is a lot of materials which are rare earth. There's a lot of export controls items as well. So as of now, right, I think a lot of companies are also, in various nations, are also quite worried about that. But that actually sets them thinking. I would say that if you were to talk about now, there probably isn't a solutions to that yet. But a lot of companies are already working on that. Let me give an example of germanium. So for those who know germanium, right, so for all your thermal camera, especially those used in the defense side of things, thermal camera uses germanium lens, which again is something that China has a lot and therefore is holding their resources. So that problems or that issues happens quite a few years ago, and in an attempt to overcome that, people therefore comes out with a new class of infrared lenses called chalcogenates. So that do away with germanium, and therefore that allows the company to not be at the mercy of one or two nations. Likewise, right, I can already see that there are similar things that is happening to the fusions industry, and in fact, fusions is a very forefront industry, or rather something that is still in the future. Currently, right, people is already trying to find a materials that can do away with rare earth for magnets. Because for all your EV vehicles, right, you do need magnets. And all those, again, a lot come from countries like China as well. And then in the attempt to try and overcome the dependency of those, there is therefore a need for us to then develop the rare earth free magnet to be placed in that situation, of course with the same performance. And you know what? This is where AI come in big. Because while we are looking at a whole series of compositions in the periodic tables with different compositions, there is no way human can do it alone. And therefore, this is where a lot of the nations and research institutes are also already looking at how they can optimize and also find new areas to solve that problem. So back to your questions about can we answer the supply chain restriction problems, I would say currently maybe not, but that it already set a lot of the nations thinking, and I'm sure very soon there might be solutions like that coming out. So with that, I pass it back to Matthew and maybe to Alexa to answer the nuclear waste problem.
Alistair, I'm going to have to ask you to answer the waste management question. That's now yours.
It's a big topic, so I'll try to be quick and brief. So fission and fusion have different waste profiles. Fission produces more of the high-level waste. Fusion will produce a larger volume of intermediate or low-level waste. Those are under various international definitions that I won't go into the depth of. But the opportunity in kind of developing new fission techniques is that we can start to use what is existing high-level waste, which actually is partially burnt fuel that we can no longer use in the way it is, but we can generate more power from that through advanced reactor designs. So at the moment, we're mostly operating in generation 3, generation 3 plus, or generation 4, a very small number of reactors. And so these are broad definitions. But looking towards generation 4 and generation 4 plus, you can start to use your existing amount of waste actually as your fuel source for the future, thereby increasing the amount of time that you're able to use that fuel, and that's going to be very important longer term. But we need innovations in the material space to make that happen, to make the reactor designs work and to be safe. So I would say it's a great opportunity, but it comes down to doing research, and some of that research will be computational, some of that research will be physical.
Thanks for that. I hope those answered the question. Thank you very much. So I'm being mindful of the time, so I would like to probably take the time back to ask both of you. We started this topic about how AI can be powered by nuclear in the future, right? We've gone through a whole range of topics about what are the challenges to deploy them, what are the ways and opportunities to build ecosystem to prepare for that eventuality where AI is powered by nuclear, and AI also pushes the development of nuclear capabilities to the next level. So on that front, maybe to give each of you about 1 minute to answer, to give your thoughts on like a final closing, rounding up any final points for our audience to consider about this particular topic. It's exciting, but it's also long term. So any final thoughts?
So I think I've been through my main points already, but the first one is getting your skills in place. So getting knowledge in place now, recognizing that nuclear will be a power source that we will need in the future. That work is starting, but we're not going to have the number of people to do it unless everybody internationally pitches in and trying to pick up that knowledge. Second point I would probably want to make is get out there and read a little bit. You don't have to read a lot to know, to get to start knowing what nuclear is about. But I think it is something, again, that having a base knowledge will really help people to get into the space, understand how it will power AI, but also every other aspect of your daily life. So removing inequality is down to producing more energy. And the best route to do that, once we use the available renewable resources, is nuclear.
Thanks. Andrew?
So I think with that, I would want to also bring back to a point that Matthew mentioned just now about the symbiotic relationship between AI and also future energy. So in this case, right, while we keep talking about AI and when we want to be responsible to the environment, we then look into future energy that are clean. So in this case, right, the symbiotic relationship is very important, especially like what I mentioned just now in A-Star. We use a lot of the AI to develop technologies that then flows back to the companies to accelerate the development and realizations of clean energy, so that at the end of the day, right, it can then fulfill that of the scaling up of data centers, because there is a need to manage the power hungry issues of data center. So this is what we will want to do in the long run towards future energy. But likewise, we are also very clear that for companies to benefit and be part of that journey, there is also a need to make sure that the company benefits from the shorter terms or even immediate benefit. And this is where we then allows, and we will then also discuss with the company of how those technologies, capabilities that we build up will also be beneficial to whatever existing industry or portfolios that they have. So I guess that's what I have from my closing.
Thank you both for the closing points. And so for myself also, as a moderator, I want to close off this session by saying that this conversation about nuclear is starting, and I hope through this particular session we have a lot more of you will have more confidence to begin the conversation as well. No one is expecting everyone to be a nuclear expert by suddenly out of nowhere. But I think this is one of the points raised. What's important that the public get engaged. The public also understands this brand new topic that's coming up. And so hopefully today has provided some basic insights for beginning a conversation. And there's also actually another session this afternoon at 2:30 where we invited Professor Grimes from Imperial College, who's a nuclear materials professor as well. So this conversation is not ending and will continue later as well. And please do not feel afraid to ask questions or even just reach out to any of us. We are more than happy to engage a conversation with you and even work together to build something out of it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you, Andrew. I hope you all had a very exciting, insightful conversation with us on nuclear.
Thank you.